So 7 years ago, I was about to turn 30 years old. 7 years ago, I was working at this warehouse, which if anyone knows York or the surrounding areas, um, actually, I'm not gonna say the name of the warehouse because everybody hates that place, and I was a supervisor there. 7 years ago, I was going through a midlife crisis because I was still kind of mourning my ex that we had been in a relationship for 4 years. So I did what anyone in their 30s having a midlife crisis would do. I sold my house, packed my shit, and went to Mexico. So I went to Mexico with no plan whatsoever because I felt like what I was doing here in York, Pennsylvania at that time wasn't very fulfilling. As soon as I got to Mexico, I started thinking, what can I do? And I had this great idea, become an English teacher. So I became an English teacher. I went to the first institution that I found, and it was great for like 3 months. I was getting trained, and I was also teaching English. Eventually, I had to kind of quit because, ironically, in Mexico, you also need papers to work, and I didn't have those. But I lasted in Mexico probably like around 8 months, and I was, during that time, I was meeting a lot of magical towns in Mexico. I was meeting a lot of friends. I used to live in Mexico for like 2 years, so I had a bunch of friends too. Eventually, I ran out of funds. And the last week that I was in Mexico, I don't know why the universe does this, but it introduced me to the love of my life. So I was at this party, and I remember this girl. It was her birthday party. She was eyeing me, and I was kind of like looking back at her, but I was like, you know what? I have to go back to the United States because I can't work here. And then her friend, Rafaela, came over and said, hey, my friend kind of like, likes you. But I was like, in no shape or form ready for a relationship because I had to come back to the States. So I said, you know what? I'm not interested. 8 hours later, with Rafaela, we're still talking and drinking beers 7 o'clock in the morning, and I had this great connection with her. But I felt like it was my chance or my last chance to say something to her, and I didn't. But we exchanged phone numbers and whatnot, and a couple days later, she reached out to me. She said, hey, we're having another party, blah, 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 you should come. So I went, had another great conversation with her, moved back to the States, but I still had that connection with her, that strong feeling. And I was like, what am I gonna do? And granted, when I came back, I had no money whatsoever. I was in the negatives, and I had no job either. So I started working at Guadalajara as a server, and then also I started taking photography for them and doing social media. And I was getting enough money and talking to Rafaela on like a daily basis. And 2 months later, I'm in Mexico. And her and I started this long distance relationship. It lasted for 3 years, actually 3 years and a half. It was the most beautiful relationship that you guys can think of. I was going there once every 2 months. And it usually seemed like it was like a honeymoon because, 2 months and then 2 months off, 2 months on in a different country. It was always like a honeymoon. I started getting different gigs. I started landing different jobs, doing a lot of freelance work, stuff that I hadn't been able to do before, just to get enough funds to keep going. Eventually, on one of those trips, we got pretty drunk and tattooed, had a matching tattoo, right? I'm not kidding, it's right here. So it's a formula, it's a quantum physics formula. I hope there's no scientists here because it's probably chopped up my version of how I'm gonna explain it. But it's called the formula of Dirac, basically explaining that when there's two different galaxies in the universe and they kind of like cross paths, they always have like this instant connection no matter the space or time. So 3 years in, we get to that point where, what are we gonna do, right? So currently working in Maryland as a server, and I'm like, you know what? This is probably the last time I'll be here in the States. But things had gotten a little bit sour, and when I went back to Mexico, I knew for a fact that I could no longer be with her because it was just, by then, just a routine. By then, she had already erased her tattoo. She had something else. I keep my tattoo because it's a great reminder for me that when you want to kind of like manifest things and do things and, you know, have good things happen to you, you have to have a strong emotion behind it. And Rafaela was that. I'm not going to say how things, you know, kind of dissolved in the relationship because that doesn't matter. She gave me the ability to be able to manifest things knowing that I need to put a strong emotion behind everything I do. And that was my last chance to talk to Rafaela. Thank you.